Hello and welcome to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. This week, our guests are former ambassador to Egypt and international affairs expert Frank Wisner and long-serving congressman and financial regulation expert Barney Frank. Remember, we love taking your questions, so write into politicswarroom@gmail.com or send a tweet to @Politicon for next week's show. Now, we'll get to as many as we can, but don't forget to tell us where you're from. And please check out the link to our sponsor, Lomi, in the show notes. We thank you for supporting our sponsors. It really helps make this podcast happen. Please tell your friends about us and remind them to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Hey, James, a bunch of kind of big political news around. On the Republican side, Ron DeSantis, who had been, I think, probably a co-favorite for the 24 presidential nomination for Republicans, he embraced the Vladimir Putin wing of the GOP, opposing efforts to help Ukraine, which he said is in a territorial dispute with Russia. And in 1939, Hitler was in a territorial dispute with Poland. I think some Republicans nervously tried to distance themselves. Lindsey Graham said he has a total misunderstanding. Another senator said, hope he learns more. What they're saying is that this guy is either a total panderer, doesn't know what he believes, doesn't know anything about foreign policy, or he's just not ready for prime time.
Well, I want to give you my suspicion.
Okay.
All right. It's a suspicion. There's money involved here, and a lot of money.
Yeah.
If I had to look in one place, I would look to see the connection with the Koch brothers, who do a bucket load of business in Russia. All right. It is my suspicion. I bet you our friend Jane Mayer is going to be on this, but I smell money, and I smell a lot of money behind this decision. I really do. And it's appalling. It's sickening. It as if we don't have real vital interest in maintaining world order and not having quote territorial wars, unquote. I mean, DeSantis has got an Ivy League law degree. He was in the Navy JAG. All right, he has to know better than this. I think he was overcome with money, but that's my strong suspicion.
Well, I wouldn't. I certainly wouldn't rule that out. I think you may be onto something. I think the other thing, or maybe a companion, was that he doesn't want Trump to get an issue where they really are too far apart, because he wants to. And Trump, of course, has always been pro-Putin and is anti-Ukraine. If he wants to play that game, James, it's a losing game, because Trump doesn't care about anything, and DeSantis is going to find himself turned in knots if he's just trying to follow the Trump line.
So I was reading that the Trump people are trying to, it's kind of an old charge, that he was easy on child molesters. I mean, that's the kind of game they're getting ready to play here.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Ron DeSantis, I don't know if Ron DeSantis knows Roger Stone, but he will.
He'll get introduced to him very quickly.
Right.
But I think this whole anti-Ukraine stuff, I think it's treasonous. I don't think it's wrong. I think it's treasonous. And the United States is in effect at some level at war. I mean, we're not have our soldiers pulling triggers or anything, but we sure have vital interests there. We sure have aid. We sure have taken sides in this. And we've taken the right side 100%. There's no alternative argument to this. And, we got problems with fentanyl. Okay. We got problems with this. Okay. So we had problems in World War II, but we were at war. And I think we're going to be here for a while. So strap in.
Yeah. No, James, you're absolutely right. On the other side, I suppose is the other side, there's a group called No Labels. It's run by Nancy Jacobson and I guess her husband, Mark Penn. And they say they plan to run an independent candidate for president in 2024, and they're already on 3 ballots. What's this all about, James?
It's all about money. What else could it be about? First of all, they're not going to win. And the only thing they can do, and understand this, when you give them money, you should just give it to Trump.
Yeah.
And the only people that are going to follow them and, anyway vote for them are going to be people that can't stand Donald Trump. And, you said, well, you think Jill Stein got more votes in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin than Trump won by. All right. And they're raising a lot of money, and they go to people, and it's no labels. We need a new kind of politics. And it is a setup. It's a Trump trap, and intelligent people are walking into it. There's nothing but bad that can come out of this. I mean, real bad that comes out of this.
Well, they certainly have a dubious past. They were the same group that vehemently opposed Nancy Pelosi for Speaker 5 years ago. Imagine if they'd been successful. That was, and then they hired disgraced journalist Mark Halpern for an exorbitant salary. So, but Mark Penn was what? He was Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, wasn't he?
He was sort of posting as lead strategist. And again, I'm told very reliably that in December of 2007, he thought that California was going to take off. It's only the biggest state in the whole thing. And you really don't know the delegate rules, But I don't think they care. I think they can make a lot of money off of this. And unfortunately, some well-meaning people are going to aid and abet an effort to disgrace the United States and reelect Donald Trump. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart.
Yeah. No, I fear you're right. James, before we get out of this, you have a dark horse, or you have a pick, rather, even for March Madness?
A couple of things that, you try to fill out the bracket is futile, but who cares? I think A&M might go, I think they might get past Texas and go a little deeper, and maybe UConn. Now, though, I think they're going to end up in a championship game, and that's problematic. But they could end up either one could end up in the Elite Eight. So that's kind of the go-to. I guess at the end of the day, I probably like Houston better. I don't know why. They're rated number one. The Final Four is going to be in Houston. I know it's, but it's still there. You don't have to travel. But I have no idea. But UConn and A&M, I think, will go deeper than most prognosticators are giving them. But it's all a crapshoot after that.
It is. If I had to pick my, A&M or UConn, it might be Indiana. I think the Hoosiers are really, they got a terrific freshman. They got an All-American forward. They got a good coach this year. They beat Purdue twice. Mike
Tackett, man.
Oh, right. Mike Tackett. When you have Mike Tackett as your chief cheerleader, what more do you want? But no, I think, and I think on the top teams, I think finally this may be the year of the Zags. We've been saying that for a long time, and they never quite make it. They're not quite as talented as they've been in the past, but they're still pretty good. I think they're a 2 seed. So keep your eye on Spokane and the Zags.
Yeah, I that's the most humbling thing in the world is filling that bracket out. And I did it for Harry Rhodes and Tony Kornhauser. He was the same one. And I don't have any doubt that the thing is going to get blown up quickly.
Oh, yeah. You lose one game early, and that it's a domino effect. It affects every game then.
Everybody says if you get a team that you think is going to outperform, take it because you'll rack up points. So if you got A&M in UConn, or you got Indiana going further than is expected, you're going to win a lot along the way, and a lot of people will lose. But
James, I've just come to my senses and realized the home front. And to keep peace at home, I want to say the Duke Blue Devils are coming on strong right now. So keep your eye on.
They are, but
they are.
Everybody's kind of written the ACC off, but look what North Carolina did last year.
Yeah.
Mediocre regularly.
But what a fall. I mean, what a fall they had this year. 4 or 5 starters back from the national runner-up, preseason number 1, and they're not even in the NIT. It really is. And, there's an answer to that. People say, how could that have happened? Very simply, they're 20 and 21-year-old kids.
Right.
That's how it happens.
I don't miss Walter Dellinger every day. I miss him kind of every hour. And he'd know what was behind the Carolina.
He would.
I promise you. He'd have the whole story.
Is there any issue that we didn't turn to Walter Dellinger on? You could turn to him on, obviously, legal affairs, political affairs, basketball affairs, music, art.
It is. He's a horrible football fan. Baseball.
Yeah. Huge Nationals fan. Right. Anyway. All right. Remember, I guess we hedged our bets. We had Texas A&M, UConn, Houston, Gonzaga, Duke, and Indiana. So maybe we'll go 0 for 6. Let's see.
I'm serious. I mean, I'm being a little hyperbole here, but not much. You ought to get these people a Nobel Prize. Right? I can't tell you how many times I've overcooked, overordered, overpicked up stuff, and God, I got to throw this out. This is terrible. I mean, when you can take leftovers and turn them into soil or fertilizer or whatever and continue the cycle of life, it's a brilliant product. Utterly brilliant. These are some insightful, forward-thinking people if I ever seen any. This product works on every level you can think. Plus, it at least makes you feel less guilty about having too much food around the house.
Mr. Carville, nobody wants to be feeling any eco-guilt after a big meal. So it's amazing when you can be certain you're doing your part to reduce waste. That's why Lomi has become such an amazing part of daily rituals. Once James and I got a Lomi, we now have the ability to turn food scraps into dirt with a push of a button. It's even more satisfying than the meal that came before it, unless you live in New Orleans. If you haven't heard, Lomi is a countertop electric composter that turns scraps to dirt in under 4 hours. Now, there's no smell when it runs, and it's really quiet. Plus, it looks sleek and fancy as part of a great kitchen setup. Judy and Mary, I know, can attest. James and I both love how much green it makes our cleanup after we have our growing clans over for shared meals. They can eat a lot. Plus, it's a powerful way to do our part. And thanks to Lomi, we have less garbage each week. We're talking 2 or more less bags in the trash cans. That means our waste isn't going to landfills and producing methane. Instead, you can turn your waste into nutrient-rich dirt that we all feed to our plants. Now, we feel great knowing that we're composting and creating a soil instead of waste. You basically have a limitless supply of dirt for your garden, and it makes cleaning up after a big family meal so much easier and environmentally friendly. So if you want to start making a positive environmental impact, or just make cleanup after dinner that much easier, Lomi is perfect for you. Head to lomi.com/warroom and use the promo code WARROOM to get $50 off your Lomi. That's $50 off when you head to LOMI.com/warroom and use promo code WARROOM at checkout. Food waste is gross. Let Lomi save you a cold trip out to the garbage can. You also can find the link in our show notes.
Hey, James, when I'm confused about a major geopolitical situation, that's not uncommon. I turn to the wisest man I know on these matters, my friend Frank Wisner, ambassador to 4 countries, including Egypt and India, top State Department official. Frank was actually acting secretary for about 3 hours and deeply knowledgeable about the Iranians. Frank, so I read the story 3 or 4 days ago about China brokering a deal with Saudi Arabia and Iran to restore diplomatic relations. And I think, as Joe Biden would say, this is a big effing deal. And then I read the next day, well, it's not really a big deal. It's a start. We're not sure if it'll change much. So tell me, as you often do with such skill, what should I think about this?
Well, I think it's an important deal. It's a deal that remains to be fully worked out. But basically, Al, I think the way of looking at this is ask ourselves a core question. Is the United States any worse off for China brokering a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia? And the answer is just clearly not. We're better off. The Gulf has been an area of huge contention. We have military on land and at sea in the area. We've teetered on the edge of war for some time to come, sometime in the past. And to see the Iranians and the Saudis decide to at least begin to bury the hatchet is good news. It reduces the threat of war, and that's in all our interest. But I go on and say, before we get overly carried away, this isn't the first time we've seen Saudi Arabia and Iran. Over the past year, they've been meeting under Iraqi mediation, and nobody paid any attention to it. The Chinese have now stepped in, and with good reason. The Chinese have agency. They are in communications with every party in the Middle East, with Iran, with Saudi Arabia, with Israel, with us, and many other states. Not true of us. We unfortunately cannot help between Iran and Saudi Arabia because we have no relationship with Iran and really haven't effectively since the JCPOA, or even if you want to date it back a bit to 1979. But I think I'd underscore as well, Al and Jim, that this is still a fragile deal, and much is going to be decided on how the Yemen matter plays out. That's really important to the Saudis, and the Iranians clearly really rein in the Houthis.
I mean, can they, Frank? I mean, you're right. That's the most tangible possible short-term benefit.
That's the trickiest. If I look around at people who've been wrong-footed in this or potentially losers, I put my finger on Israel. I think the Israelis had hoped at some level to create a Saudi, Israeli, American front against Iran. And that's not going to happen. Nor do I think Saudi Arabia is rushing towards joining the Abraham Accords. So I think probably, Al and Jim, in a strategic sense, the really big news of this story is, if we haven't noticed it in the past, China's time has come. China is going to be a serious diplomatic player on the world stage. It has the diplomats, it has the expertise, it has the traditions, it has the skill. And instead of sitting in the audience and watching others on the stage, the Chinese are now there. And we're going to see a lot more of them. And it's what American statecraft has got to take into account. And that's a rather big mouthful. I hope I didn't say too much.
No, you didn't. And you did say earlier that this was actually good for America. Much of the analysis is, Xi Jinping really pulled this off. I mean, he spent a lot of time on this over the past 2 years, and it's a real setback for America's influence in the region. You don't view it that way.
I don't view it that way. I think our relationships with the Saudis are very important. They're fraught. But I'm given to understand that this didn't take us entirely by surprise. The Saudis kept us in the loop. And basically, it doesn't leave us worse off with less leverage on any front. Plus, we have overwhelming military superiority in the region. China isn't going to walk away with the Arab world. We are the most consequential external player and will continue to be for some time to come. But this is now shared space, and we need to get used to that.
James Carville.
It's so embarrassing, Al. We're a sufficient generation. When we were kids and we'd play a pickup baseball game, we'd throw the bat back and forth, and and whoever got first, you'd choose sides. All right. It looks to me like the sides are now pretty much lined up. That North America, Western Europe, East Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and then the more totalitarian: China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and it's producing us helping Australia build a nuclear submarine. The Korean president, I think, is in Japan right now. I mean, our team strikes me we got a better team going into this than they do. That's what point I'm trying to make. Is that the point?
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. You've got to add Japan to playing on our side. And then what about all of Europe?
Right.
It's not just the British, but we have a very solid lineup that Joe Biden's been quite effective in bringing the allies together and forging a consensus. It's a real signal to China. If you watch the Chinese, they're extremely nervous about their position, which is slipped in Europe. So you put Europe, you put the US, you put India, you put Australia, you put Japan, South Korea, and then with huge outreach on our part elsewhere in the world. I'd like to play on that side. I think we can win the World Series.
Yeah, I agree. And let's move to Ukraine for a second. And Val and I will talk about this later, but I have to get your insight in. Is DeSantis has now said, well, we don't have a vital interest, we should get out. Do you view us as having a vital interest there? And if you do, explain why we have a vital interest there.
Al and Jim, I think we have a vital interest. I think the entire world order that emerged after 1945 has been put at risk when one large power can invade another power with impunity and impose its will, destroy that power, overtake it. That's what we've been about for the past years, since 1945, trying to protect a world in which sovereignty is respected. And here come the Russians, and they have taken this core principle of global balance, torn it up and thrown it away. And we simply can't stand aside and expect there to be any modicum of stability in the world in which our trade, our political influence, our national fortunes can be effectively protected if they're dinosaurs moving around the global stage, trampling on everything underfoot. Stopping and signaling to the Russians that they've overstepped is really important. And now it's been important and it'll be important for years to come. We need to stand up to this kind of pressure.
So, before I turn it over to Al, and Al knows I'm obsessed with this point, we need to open a home front. We need a propaganda war here in Western Europe to explain what's going on, to tell stories, to flood the airways, to flood the op-eds, to flood social media and everything else. And if we don't do that, Putin is sitting in Moscow, said, these sons of bitches are soft and I'm just going to wait them out. And I'm afraid he might be right. That's my obsession.
Well, you'll have a resonance with me. The longer this war drags on, the harder it is to sustain commitment in Western Europe and in this country. We're okay for the moment, despite nonsense from people like Donald Trump and DeSantis. But we're okay for the moment. But this war isn't over, and we don't see a way out of it. I think it's vitally important we stand our ground, but at the same time, make it clear to the world that we're looking for peace. We, on the side of the Ukrainians, want a peaceful outcome. And at some point, we'd welcome a negotiation. You can't see a war come to an end on its own. Either would end with a negotiation or a stalemate, and a stalemate will just prolong the agony.
Right. Albert, thank you, sir.
Frank, you mentioned Israel a moment ago. They must not be terribly happy in Tel Aviv today.
Well, there are many Israels, and some Israels are really unhappy. Demonstrations, the likes of which I've never seen, have been in front of the Knesset protesting Netanyahu's attempts to subvert the Constitution and defang their Supreme Court. That's one element of unhappiness. There's unhappiness on the West Bank with this new government that's provoked a lot of violence among the Palestinians and lives are being lost. I think there's unhappiness as well with Israel's status among the Arabs. I noticed UAE has announced that it isn't going to go ahead with military understandings until Israel gets control of itself on the West Bank. And then there's a sharp debate, the most lively debate in my life in this country about our traditional support for Israel. So if I were sitting in the government offices in Tel Aviv, I would be worried. It's not a good season.
Boy, it sure is not. Let me turn for a second, because you have such great expertise on so many things, but nobody probably understands the Iranians better than Frank Wisner. You've dealt with them a great deal. We know, and going back to this Saudi-Iranian diplomatic relations, we know that MBS basically calls the shots in Saudi Arabia, but there are different factions in Tehran. How do you think this plays internally?
Well, I've long held the view, Al, that if you try to second guess somebody else's domestic politics, you're probably going to get it wrong. Yes. And you have to base strategy, national strategy and policy on the government that's there and what the cards are that are on the table. Those are the ones you're forced to play with. You better play with them. I agree there are factions. There always are inside of governments, agreements and disagreements. But basically, Iran today is in hardline hands. The supreme leader, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, and the harder line political conservative faction, they're in the dominant seat since the last election in Iran. They're calling the shots, but they are beleaguered. The economy is a mess. Demonstrations since September on the streets over the way women have been treated and the murder of quite innocent protesters. They're in trouble with their minorities in the country, particularly the Kurds and the Baluch, their Arab population. They've got a lot of things on their minds, not to mention the fact that they've overextended themselves with Russia. And I just can't imagine all Iranians think a tight arrangement with Putin is the best cause for Iranian national interests. That would fly in the face of history.
Right. Just one final quick before I go back to James to wrap this up. Did Xi Jinping show more skill than many people suspected he had in this, or was it just not pro forma, but was this just not a great act of diplomacy?
Well, let's go back a bit. You know, Xi has been receiving all Arab heads of state. The Saudis have been to Beijing. Xi has been courting the Arabs. He has huge economic interests in the Arab world. He's now taken a step forward to emphasize that China is seeking stability so that issues like its petroleum supplies can be assured and its markets can be assured as well. So I'm not surprised the Chinese are there. They've come out. They certainly have a skillful diplomatic service. They have a capacity to conduct analysis of foreign problems. But now they see a responsibility for maintaining some degree of stability in a very fraught region. I don't think that's bad for the United States. They're not going to displace us. But we still have to be extremely wary about the overreach of Chinese power. I don't see it in this case. I do see it in the South China Sea, in the threats to Japan, in the boycotts of Australia, in the maneuvers in the Himalayas. Those are all areas where China has overreached, and we have got to be extremely careful, and are. But here, I'm not as excited. In the end, as I said in the outset, I don't see where we lose with less tension in the Gulf. And if the Chinese got us here, so be it.
James, you want to wrap this up?
Quickly, observation, get your reaction to it, Mr. Ambassador. In Tehran, you have these different power groups. As you know, we famously made the nuclear deal, and because people were for it in Iran, a lot of people were against it. Then Trump pulls out, and the other guys are saying, you see, you can't trust these sons of bitches. We don't need to deal with them anymore. They gave us their word. Now we don't have their word. At least China might keep their word to us. Did pulling out of that nuclear deal strengthen the hand of, I don't know, hardliners of whatever you want to call them? Was that a factor in this decision, do you think?
Well, I'm not sure it's a factor in the Saudi-Iran decision, but it is definitely a factor in the alienation we have in the region. We can't deal with Iran. We can't exercise agency because we entered in good faith with the Iranians into the nuclear deal in 2015. And then Trump pulled us out of it with no justification, no violation on the Iranian part, shattering confidence. Trust and confidence are at the heart of international relations. If you don't trust the other party, you can't make deals and you can't live by those deals. And the single most dangerous issue, you're absolutely right, is this nuclear issue. We put our foot right in the midst of the nastiest problem of all, and it's now out there and it is not resolved, and it will trouble us until we can find a way to get our hands around it.
Well, thank you, sir. You have a well-deserved reputation for wisdom. Wisdom. Thank you, sir.
James Carville, thank you. It's flattered.
James, you can see why I said that whenever I want to find out what I think about anything involving international relations, I call Frank Wisner. This has been a tutorial, particularly for us.
Thank God we could share him with our audience. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you both.
We're about to start an interview with Barney Frank. There may be some audio problems, so please just stick with us. This past weekend saw the second and third largest bank failures in modern history. The Biden administration moved quickly to guarantee all deposits. Some were well over the $250,000 FDIC guarantee. Following the financial crisis of 15 years ago, Congress enacted the Dodd-Frank reform measure. This was supposed to prevent things like this. Nobody knows more about this issue than Barney Frank, who also is on the board of one of those failed banks. Barney, you have taken a rare issue with a usual ally, Elizabeth Warren, in which she blames the 2018 Dodd-Frank modifications, lifting the levels on which banks are systematically important or too big to fail. That's what really caused the Silicon Valley bank failure. You don't agree?
No. Two things I want to say about it. First, just to clear up the personal thing. I decided in 2012 that we had gone too low at $50 billion. That's the issue. And in fact, in 2013, I made a speech at a conference that the Federal Reserve District of Chicago had, saying that. The reason I say that is it is true that the Signature Bank, on which I later became a board member, benefited from that. But I made that public statement in 2013 at a time I'd never heard of Signature. And in fact, the New York Times presented those today, yesterday, as if they were somehow connected. So, an independent judgment. The first thing I would say is this: the move of 50 billion to 250, which I thought was too high, I wanted to go to 150. It did not in any way diminish the regulators' powers. It diminished the reporting requirements for the banks, essentially. But the regulator had all the powers that they needed. I haven't seen anybody point to one of the causes of the failure of either Signature or Silicon Valley that was due to something they missed because of that change. I literally don't see the causal connection. I would note in this that the entity that took the lead in shutting down Signature, I think erroneously, was not any of the federal agencies, but the state of New York supervisor who's unaffected by the 2018 law.
Right.
In other words, the 2018 law had zero effect on the entity that decided that Signature needed to be shut down. So how can that be responsible?
The Silicon Valley Bank, the right wing already is trying to blame this on woke, and particularly the ESG, environmental, social, and governance. When I look at that, it seems to me that was a classically mismanaged bank. They, in fact, didn't have governance. They weren't woke enough. If governance is woke, they made bad bets, and when interest rates went up, it came back to haunt them. They were really arrogant, and it was just bad management, wasn't it? I mean, they really went and they bought. They invested in long-term bonds, and when the interest rates went up, it came back to hit them.
People say things, and you say, "Well, what is the connection? What did they do that made them vulnerable?" And the answer is no. There is one problem, by the way, that was common to Signature and Silicon Valley that I hope we will fix going forward, that the administration correctly, temporarily fixed, and that's the limit on deposits. In our case in particular, there was no operating. The New York Division of Financial Services didn't say we're insolvent. They said, well, we couldn't get the right data. If they'd waited a day, we wouldn't have had a problem with what they announced. But here's the problem we both had. We do a lot of real estate. In Silicon Valley does a lot of high tech. Our major depositors are businesses who need a lot of money on hand to make payroll and to operate. And the problem is the $250,000 limit means that the deposits of these major entities for whom we're performing an important meaning payroll, they're at risk. And so the slightest tremor, and they have an incentive to go to JP Morgan Chase, et cetera. I hope price now has responded by increasing the deposit guarantee limit to businesses in particular. We're not talking about some millionaire's pocket money, but somebody who's got payroll money. And in both cases, in the House, to make that permanent, again, for businesses, because it's not the business we're worried about, but the people who get paid by that business. We lost out for a lot of reasons. The administration has now once again redone that. So this is the second time that they have increased the deposit limit for businesses in case of a crisis. If the guarantee for deposits had been in effect, we wouldn't have had the slightest trouble.
Okay. Barney, let's talk about Signature Bank, where you're on the board. Again, you know the limits of my knowledge about financial institutions. You know better than most from all of our conversations over the years. But what you read is that a chief problem appeared to be heavy investments in problematic cryptocurrencies. Is that fair?
Wrong. That's an example of the mistake. We were not involved we did not invest in crypto. We had zero exposure if crypto went down in value. That was more true of Silicon Valley than was confused. What our leadership did with regard to crypto, I think was perfectly responsible. We did not have crypto deposits. We did not invest ourselves in crypto. What Signature did was to set up a platform so that two customers of Signature Bank, both of whom were customers of the bank, who wanted to pay each other, wanted to deal with each other in crypto, could do so. We offered a platform for two other entities that wanted to transact in crypto. Any risk of loss there was on their shoulders.
Yeah. James Carville.
So Congressman, I'm going to ask you an easy question. What should the Fed do at the next meeting?
Oh, I don't think they should raise. I think, I go back now, James, to the 90s when we were, as you noted, working in the bond market, not happily. And at the time, there was this concept they called the NAGU, which was the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment. The view was that if unemployment got too low, it would trigger inflation. And it turns out, and the economists now admit it, the number they were imposing on you and your administration back then was wrong. They were assuming that 5% unemployment was going to trigger inflation, and it didn't. Unemployment under Bill Clinton was down to 3.9. It hasn't been below 4 until very recently under Joe Biden. And they had to realign that. I think we're in a similar period right now. I think because if you look at what was the prevailing economic wisdom earlier, say a year ago, the unemployment rate we've seen down to about 3.6, that should have triggered much more inflation. Instead, we have a situation where but it's marginally eroding. Well, unemployment continues to stay low, and in fact, we've had much better job numbers than people expected. So I think, frankly, as it was in the 90s, it's time to re-examine the notion that unemployment that gets below 4, that's inherently inflationary. So I think the Fed should hold off and see if that good news is true. I think it is.
So going back to Dodd-Frank and then the threshold of regulation, I just want to get clear that I heard you correctly, that the subsequent bill did not decrease the amount of regulation what it did would it pertain to reporting. Is that correct?
It did not in any way diminish the regulators' powers. It did. The bill, and it's still in effect for banks over 250. It's still in effect for JP Morgan Chase and Citicorp and Bank of America, et cetera. It said that they had to conduct more frequent stress tests, and they had to prepare a living will, which is what you do, in preparation for being dissolved. But the actual powers to say to a bank, you got to stop doing that. You got to increase your capital. That hasn't changed. They still have the ability to do it. Now, you could argue, well, but because they didn't have to report as much, things were going on in these banks at that level, in the 150, 200 level, that we didn't notice. But nobody showed me what that was. It is not the case that there was anything that was going on that people didn't see. And as I said, you had the New York regulator who didn't lose any power. But whatever and I will tell you, as a member of the board, I was a member of the board before and after 2018, I didn't see any diminution in the regulation. And so the question is, maybe there were things that they would have spotted if they had more frequent reporting.
All right, one final quick question. Having guaranteed all deposits at Silicon Valley, no matter how large, isn't that a precedent? Any bank failure, they're going to have to guarantee, the federal government is going to have to guarantee any losses for any bank.
No, here's what we should do. First of all, it should be only for businesses. We're not talking about some millionaire's pocket change. We're talking about businesses, and the interest is not protecting so much that entity as their payroll. Maxine Waters and Sherrod Brown were very much engaged in this to protect people's payrolls. I think the rule should be that if a business, you don't set an absolute number for any people different. A business can establish that it has a certain need in millions or tens of millions of dollars to maintain its payroll and operations for 2 months, that should be guaranteed. Beyond that, they can make some other arrangements. But having, as I said, telling high-tech people or real estate developers in our case that they have to keep millions on hand to run their business, but it's at risk because it's not guaranteed, that sets the basis for a run. That's what we had. So again, I think not in the interest of either the banks or the businesses themselves, but the local economies in which they operate, they should be given a guarantee to have enough cash on hand to keep going for 2 months.
Barney Frank, it's always instructive to talk to you. I've been doing this now for about 55 years. So thank you very much. Enjoy yourself down there, and I hope I'll see you next time you get to Washington.
Thank you, sir. I learned a lot. But maybe that's because I didn't know very much, but I did learn a lot.
Thank you, Barney.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, James, now for the outrage of the week. Mine is not an outrage, but it's a tribute to a remarkable woman. Pat Schroeder, a 24-year Colorado Congresswoman, veteran of 24 years in the Congress at the end of the 20th century, passed away this week after a stroke. A member of the House She had a marvelous presence, a sharp wit, and contagious charm. She refused to be passive at a time when women were usually relegated to the back bench. When asked for the umpteenth time how she could be a mother and a member of Congress, she famously replied that she had a uterus and a brain and used both. She left in 1996. I wish she could have stayed a decade longer to see Nancy Pelosi become the most effective and powerful speaker in the House. I loved covering Pat Schroeder. She was a treat and a pathfinder.
Yeah, she was quite a remarkable person. She's been pretty old. How old was she when
she was 82?
82? That's not that.
That's a lot younger than it used to be, James.
Shit. Is it? Well, we talked about what is the most outrageous thing, so I'm not going to use it, and that is Ron DeSantis being on the tape. I just want to point something out. It's not an outrage, but I read this site called Puck, and I think it's pretty good. Whatever. And it had an article about the evolution of AOC. As you know, you and I both have always kind of thought that she had a lot of talent, and, by far the most in the squad. And it's about how she's evolving into wanting to be a player. And she's become less about social media and kind of more about policy. It was the general gist of the piece. And I think this kind of thing needs to be encouraged because she's got too big of a brain. She's got too much talent. She's got the it factor. And I sure hope she continues to put that to use to be an effective legislator and leader and not first and foremost a presence on social media. But I think that they did a good job on the article, and I certainly AOC doesn't need my approval or disapproval, but I think she's moving in a smart direction.
I give all the credit to her communications chief, Lauren Hitt, who was a student of mine and is going to give the address at the Annenberg graduation in May. So no, I think AOC is a formidable figure. Now for these terrific listener questions. John in Sonoma, California. John, I think you're a repeat questioner. Thank goodness. Keep them coming. John prefers Joe Biden to step aside. But if he runs, how about as the jobs president? Taiwanese chip manufacturers just opened a 44,000 job factory in Arizona. This could be a pretty darn good issue for him. James?
Yeah, well, first of all, just the mention of Sonoma makes me smile. I just love that.
Me too.
World, you know?
Yeah.
And look, Joe Biden has a record that is well over deserving to be reelected as of now. The question is the country is going to consider whether it wants an 86-year-old president. And it's not going to go away. I certainly would vote for him. I certainly think that if you count the lowest unemployment rate since 1969, if you count record number of people on health insurance, you're talking about rebuilding an entire chip industry, which is critical to everything else. You're talking about a really successful intervention in Ukraine. That's not what's weighing on people's minds. All right. And sure, he's been a great president, but the age thing is not going away. I'm sorry, it's just not.
You're right. You're absolutely right. James, we have a bunch of questions which I'm going to combine on Fox News. Barbara in Charlottesville said, I was recently talking to a faithful Fox viewer, and they never heard of the Dominion lawsuit. How are we going to get this frighteningly large amount of people who watch Fox to learn about it? And then we have, I love this, Shane in Tonsberg, Norway. Did you get that, James? Norway.
You're talking about a beautiful country. Jeez.
Oh, it really is. With the Dominion case revealing the extent of the GOP-Fox News relationship, can a case be made that they have been guilty of campaign contributions in kind? Well, the case can be made. It wouldn't succeed in a court of law, but I think they certainly are. And finally, and I'm going to come back to I guess it was Barbara's question to begin with. Finally, I guess it's Kim in San Jose. So much is coming out about Fox News knowingly lying to the public. how can Kayleigh McEnany, who worked as the White House Director of Communications under Trump, paid by taxpayers, was allowed to stand at the White House podium and knowingly lie with complete impunity? Well, that's the Trump administration, Kim. Kayleigh was hardly alone. And just going back to the first question from Barbara about, the Fox viewers didn't even know about this. Hallie Kurtz, their media reporter, said, they're not letting me cover this. And he complained. So finally they said, you can cover it. And I'm sure this was all done, straight. And Hallie basically reported Fox is clean as a whistle here. They're innocent. So
well,
there you go.
Yeah, you guys, it's hard for us to understand. I mean, us, you and I, the people that listen to this show, your mind can't get up it. They don't want the truth. The people that tune into Fox, the last thing that they want is the truth.
Right.
They all boss viewers because the guy predicts at 9:00 Eastern or whatever it was that Biden was going to carry Arizona. Of course he did. They didn't want to hear that. Right. All right. And they don't care that Tucker gets out saying Trump's, he passionately hates him. It's all deranged, the whole election thing. And there you go again. They don't care. They want to be lied to. And if you don't lie to them, they will pay somebody else to lie to them. And I'm sorry, it's depressing. And I don't even think it's very controversial. That's just what they're looking for is just lying bullshit. And the people that are giving it to them, of course, know it's clear that it's lying bullshit. And, and now Tucker Carlson saying that the only thing bigger than saying that people in January 6th did anything wrong was the election of 2020 when he's got 40 texts, all right, saying the same crap.
Well, let's pick up on that because Ken in Oka, those Wisconsin towns, they are so hard to pronounce. Okonomowoc, Ocnomowoc. Ken, write us and tell us how I pronounce that because I'm sure I screwed it up. But he asked, has Tucker been able to create his own January 6th narrative? Do anybody really buy that?
Well, before they want to be lied to. So he tells them that the government made all this up and these pro-Trump people are totally innocent. They want to they want to be lied to, and of course, he's doing just that. But that's what they pay for. You got to understand that. And just get off a little rabbit track here. Wisconsin, we got to get Ben Wickler on because my understanding this Wisconsin Supreme Court race is starting to tighten pretty good.
Right.
And I'm going to ask Ben and I'll ask Charlie Sykes, but I think Wisconsin has more difficult place names to pronounce than any other state. It's just, the
Absolutely.
wild counties and the vowel counties, and they do have a lot of tongue twisters. But at any rate, it's very hard for you to get out of your reality, truth, fact, bullshit narrative of the world. That's the last thing that they are interested in.
Karen in Foster City, California, that's easy, wants the Democrats to do what it takes to win in 2024. So with that in mind, why haven't they tried to recall McCarthy using the tactics of the far right of the Republican Party forced McCarthy to implement in exchange for their votes? I don't think they want to do that, James. Let Republicans do that. He's walking on eggshells every day. If they do make a motion to vacate the chair, every Democrat's going to vote for it. In contrast to the right wing threatening Boehner, 8 or 9 years ago, when privately Pelosi told Boehner, we'll supply you the votes. Kevin McCarthy has no goodwill, and anytime he makes a move that they don't like, the crazies can move to vacate the chair. Let them stew in their own juices, Karen.
So you've been on this, and correctly so, and I'll compliment you. There's these stories now about McCarthy has to produce a budget, and they're going to make the, quote, moderates, unquote, walk the line. And, of course, this has been covering this for 40 years. They're not going to touch, or they claim not going to touch Social Security, Medicare, and defense spending. I want to see what that budget looks like. I just want to vote. Just keep shoving them rope. Just keep shoving them rope.
Have you ever seen Blue Smoke and Mirrors?
It's going to be beyond that. All right. I mean, it's going to be beyond that. So, hey, to our friend in California and to everybody, I just do my knitting, but I'm going to come back. I can't emphasize this enough. No labels is an existential threat to not only the United States, but democracy and freedom around the world. Don't get sucked into that.
Yep. Paul, in Hancock, New Hampshire, is there any chance the DNC and Biden will reconsider their crazy plans to hold a South Carolina primary before New Hampshire? Our state constitution requires we hold the first primary, and we will, regardless of what the DNC does. As you know, no one or two media buys cover New Hampshire. That's why it's hand-to-hand, and that's what makes us unique.
You and I, we have our disagreements. This is not one of the disagreements that we have. Right. And, and by the way, Marianne Williamson or whoever's running for, no matter who it is, all right, Tiger the Cat is going to get 25%. I mean, they did this because they didn't want South Carolina, which they view would be more stable, and New Hampshire's kind of quirky, and independents can vote. And this is, people in New Hampshire, this is like having a freaking Super Bowl. I don't know how it's going to end up. They might still end up going first. But they have pissed off a swing state with 2 Democratic senators and 2 Democratic Congress people to fix a problem that does not exist. Southern blacks have had all of the clout in picking Democratic presidential nominees, and they've had it since 1992. All right?
Well, they certainly picked, James, you're so right. They picked the last 3 Democratic nominees. They picked Barack Obama in 2008. They picked Hillary Clinton in 2016, and they picked Joe Biden in 2020.
They picked Bill Clinton in 92.
Right. They have had far more influence than New Hampshire. Far more.
Much more. And we're just pissing off a state that Democrats do okay in, all right? But, if Gore wins New Hampshire, we don't have near the mess we have in this country now. But
he'd have won the presidency, right?
I do not. I think we're needlessly pissing off people in a swing state.
Yeah. Dot in New York City says if there are Republicans entering the field that are willing to criticize Trump, state on the record that Biden won the election to speak out against January 6th. Can a Democrat encourage her conservative friends to support them? Sure, you can. I don't think they're going to get very far in that party, but absolutely, you can. And even if in New York and there's no Democratic contest, and if you can, I don't know New York state law, but if you can re-register short term as a Republican and vote for them.
I guess I just think the whole Republican experiment is doomed, and they're going to do it. And it doesn't even. It's just now turned into just a frenzy. It doesn't even make any logical sense. It doesn't make any political sense. And racial resentment, as Tom Edsall has pointed out and cited the research, this is what drives these people. It's not economics and it's not anything else. And, good luck, but the most productive thing you can do is support and donate to Democrats.
Yeah. Finally, Donna in Las Vegas asked, good question. Why are military members so Republican? Can you comment on this? And is there a way to influence more military members to become Democrats?
I don't, they traditionally been Republicans, and back when I was younger, the officer class was 90% Republican. All right, now I'd be surprised if it's 45% Republican.
Right.
The troops are different, and a disproportionate number of people in the military, their parents were in the military. And it's traditionally been a conservative institution in the United States. But the military is having a hell of a problem with these Trump people. And they're having a real problem with political divisions in the barracks and on our ships and everywhere else. So there's a lot of complicated, some uncomplicated reasons and some a little bit more. But the higher echelon of military is significantly less Republican today than it was 20 years ago. I can
No, I think that's right.
Right.
All right, keep those letters coming in because we love to read them, and it's awful hard to pick out the 6 or 7 best ones. So if you didn't get your question asked this week, send it in again next week. Hey, thanks for listening to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. Don't forget to send your questions for us by email to politicswarroom@gmail.com or tweet them for next week's show @Politicon. Following this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you check out the links to our sponsor, Lomi, in the show notes. We thank you for supporting them. When you do, you help make this podcast happen. To keep up with us, subscribe to Politics War Room on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. Please rate the show with a 5-star review. We'll be back next week with another show as we continue our War Room planning.